Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let the pace of the world settle into something quieter, something that doesn't rush you to understand, but rather invites you to listen. This isn't a place of judgment, nor of blame. It's a gentle space where we can look, without anger, at something many people whisper about, but rarely explore deeply. Why most men betray loyalty without you seeing it. Not always through visible acts, not always through infidelity or deceit, but through the slow erosion of connection that begins long before either heart realizes what's happening. It begins quietly, often disguised as the rhythm of life, work, responsibility, distraction. A man wakes up, goes about his day, says the right words, does what is expected of him, but inside, something starts to drift. Not because of another person, but because of himself. He begins to feel a distance between who he is and who he is expected to be. The world asks him to perform strength, to be certain, to carry the weight of steadiness, even when his heart trembles underneath. In that space between expectation and authenticity, a subtle betrayal begins, not of his partner, not yet, but of his own truth. Philosophy often tells us that all outer acts begin with inner disconnection. Betrayal is rarely spontaneous. It's cultivated in silence, in those small moments when one ignores what is felt, when one chooses peace over honesty, habit over curiosity, convenience over confrontation. In that silence, something sacred begins to wither. A man might still smile, still offer comfort, still do everything right, but he is no longer fully there. And yet, this absence hides well. It hides behind laughter, behind routine, behind the familiar comfort of shared life. It's an invisible departure. If you've ever watched two people sitting together at dinner, barely speaking, their eyes drifting elsewhere, you've seen this quiet form of betrayal. There's no conflict, no open wound, only distance, soft, polite, but unbearable in its silence. That's often how emotional betrayal lives. It's not a storm, it's the absence of rain. It's not cruelty, it's the gradual loss of warmth. Psychologists have long observed that many men are taught from childhood to suppress what they feel. Be strong, they hear. Don't cry. Don't talk too much about what's wrong. These small phrases, repeated over years, teach them to internalize emotions instead of expressing them. But what we bury doesn't disappear. It transforms. It turns to numbness, irritability, confusion. When a man cannot face his pain, he escapes it, and the escape may come in many forms. Work, distraction, fantasy, even emotional detachment. But every escape, no matter how small, takes him a little further away from the relationship he once cherished. It's a paradox. Many men don't see this as betrayal. They believe they're being loyal simply because they stay, because they provide, because they don't leave, because they still come home every night. But emotional loyalty is not measured by presence, it's measured by depth. When a man withdraws inwardly, even while standing beside his partner, he betrays the intimacy that once connected them. It's not betrayal through action, it's betrayal through absence. In the calm spaces of life, you can sometimes sense this change. A partner who used to listen deeply now nods absently. A laugh that used to light up his face now feels rehearsed. A conversation once full of dreams becomes filled with silence or surface words. These shifts are small, almost invisible, but they carry the weight of something profound. The quiet departure of emotional truth. Philosophically, one might call it the fading of the self. Nietzsche wrote that when one lives against their own nature for too long, They become strangers to their own soul. A man who betrays loyalty often does so, not because he stops loving, but because he stops feeling alive within the relationship. And rather than confront that emptiness, he conceals it. This concealment is what makes the betrayal invisible. It wears the face of normalcy. It looks like everything is fine. But beneath that illusion, something sacred begins to fracture. There's also a gentleness in understanding this, because it reminds us that betrayal at its core is a human flaw born from fear. Men often fear vulnerability more than loneliness. Vulnerability feels like exposure, like being seen without armor, and loyalty, real loyalty, requires exactly that: to be open, to be fragile, to be seen in imperfection. But if a man has never been shown how to be safe in that openness, he hides instead, and hiding, though it feels like protection, eventually becomes the root of emotional betrayal. It's easy to think of betrayal as an act of cruelty, yet in many cases, it's simply a loss of awareness. A man forgets to tend to what he loves. He assumes love will sustain itself. That connection doesn't need constant care, but love is like breath. It must be renewed, again and again, through presence and intention. When that renewal stops, something vital begins to die, even if both people are still trying. There's an old Japanese custom called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty. It's a reminder that what is broken can become even more beautiful when acknowledged. But when a man refuses to see the cracks in himself, in his relationship, he cannot heal them. He pretends they don't exist. He smiles, he works, he lives, but inside, he knows something feels off. That quiet dishonesty is where betrayal breathes. In daily life, it can appear in the smallest details: a forgotten touch, a hurried goodbye, a night spent scrolling instead of listening. None of it feels like betrayal at first, but over time, these moments gather like dust on glass, dimming the light that once shone clearly through. The relationship becomes functional, predictable, safe, but no longer alive. And still, he tells himself, "I'm loyal. I haven't done anything wrong." Yet the truth is, loyalty cannot live without emotional presence. What makes this kind of betrayal so hard to see is that it wears the mask of normal life. No arguments, no visible lies, just quiet routine. But deep down the heart knows. The woman feels the absence before she can name it. The man feels the weight before he can admit it. Both sense the silence growing louder, and yet neither wants to disturb the peace, so they live politely beside each other, unaware that the most painful kind of betrayal is not the one that breaks love apart, but the one that lets it fade unnoticed until there's nothing left to save. In the quiet fabric of daily life, loyalty is not something that loudly declares itself. It is subtle, often woven into the smallest gestures that keep love alive. The way someone listens, the way they remember, the way they choose to stay emotionally present, even when life feels heavy. But when that presence begins to fade, when a man starts to turn inward instead of reaching out, something delicate within the relationship begins to change. It is not the kind of betrayal that leaves scars on the surface. It is the one that grows quietly beneath ordinary moments, when no one thinks to look. In psychology, there is an idea that we live our relationships through what is unspoken as much as through what is said. The silences, the pauses, the eyes that look away. These speak a language of their own. A man who begins to betray loyalty rarely does it through sudden distance. It begins with hesitation. He stops sharing little things about his day. He stops asking questions that once came naturally. he stops noticing the emotions that live in the spaces between words. To the outside world, nothing has changed, but to the person who loves him, the change is felt like a chill that enters through a barely open window. There is something deeply human about this pattern. Men, especially, are taught to find purpose in doing, not in feeling. They are rewarded for achievement, not reflection. So when life becomes heavy or emotions become complex, they instinctively seek control, not through understanding, but through retreat. That retreat can look like silence, work, distraction, or even kindness that feels mechanical, and yet that withdrawal, so small and so polite, begins to create a distance that no words can fill. The betrayal here is not in what he does, but in what he forgets to do, to feel, to see, to connect. He may still be kind, still responsible, still loving in ways that seem enough, but loyalty is not about perfection. It is about presence. True loyalty asks for emotional visibility, to let oneself be seen, not just in moments of confidence, but also in uncertainty. When a man hides his inner confusion instead of sharing it, he unknowingly begins to live behind a curtain, even while standing right beside the person he loves. The philosophers like Erich Fromm once said that love is not merely a feeling but an action, a constant choice to see and to care. But modern life, with its rush and noise, has made seeing each other harder. We move through our days half aware, half distracted, and in this half-living, loyalty begins to erode. The man who once listened now only hears. The one who once dreamed now plans. The one who once spoke from the heart now speaks from habit. Slowly, the emotional language between two people begins to fade into something functional, polite, and empty. There is a certain tragedy in this quiet transformation, because on the surface, everything appears fine. The dinners are shared, the conversations still happen, the routines still flow, but underneath, something sacred has shifted. The emotional pulse that once made every small act feel alive begins to weaken, and when that pulse slows, the relationship becomes something like a photograph, beautiful, familiar, but no longer breathing. Men who find themselves in this space often feel confused rather than cruel. They do not set out to betray. They drift. Their inner world becomes crowded with unspoken thoughts, unmet needs, and quiet discontent that they don't know how to name. Instead of confronting it, they cover it with busyness, with politeness, with rationality. It's easier to say, "I'm tired," than to say, "I feel empty." It's easier to fix a problem at work than to admit, "I feel disconnected from the person I love." And so the betrayal deepens, not because of dishonesty, but because of avoidance. There is also a cultural layer to this. In many societies, men are not encouraged to be emotionally fluent. They grow up believing that strength means silence, that expressing confusion makes them weak. They learn to love through protection, not through vulnerability. But love without vulnerability becomes duty, and duty without emotional renewal becomes fatigue. Eventually, fatigue turns into absence, not physical absence, emotional, the kind that lingers in the air between two people who used to understand each other without words, and now find even words feel like strangers. Philosophically, this is a kind of forgetting. Heidegger spoke of forgetfulness of being, the way people lose touch with their authentic selves when they live on autopilot. Many men betray loyalty in exactly this way, by forgetting themselves inside the role they are expected to play. The husband, the provider, the reliable one. But in performing these roles too well, they forget how to simply be. And when one forgets how to be, they slowly stop knowing how to love. In daily life, this looks ordinary. It looks like a man who stays late at work because he tells himself he's providing. It looks like one who scrolls through his phone late at night because silence feels too heavy. It looks like one who talks about plans but avoids feelings. Each of these small acts may seem harmless, even responsible, but together they form a pattern, a soft betrayal of the emotional connection that once made love real. The woman, sensing this change, may try to reach him gently at first, then with worry. She asks if he's okay. He says yes. She asks if something's wrong. He says no. She feels unseen, but he feels misunderstood. Both are right, and both are wrong, because what they are fighting is not each other. It's the silence between them, the one that grows when truth is withheld out of fear. There's a saying in Japanese philosophy, mano no aware, the quiet awareness of impermanence, the gentle sadness that comes from knowing everything changes. Perhaps this is what happens when loyalty begins to fade without anyone noticing. It's not dramatic, it's not cruel. It's the natural erosion that comes when presence is replaced by performance, when love is lived through memory instead of renewal. And yet, beneath all this, there remains something tender, because the reason men betray loyalty without seeing it is not that they do not care. It's that they have forgotten how to connect care with openness. They mistake responsibility for intimacy, protection for presence, endurance for love. They think being loyal means staying, when in truth, it means continuing to feel, continuing to see, continuing to reach, even when it's uncomfortable. So the betrayal that begins invisibly is not a story of villains or victims. It's a story of forgetting, of how easily we lose touch with our inner world when the outer world demands so much, and of how love without awareness becomes a quiet performance where everyone does their part and yet no one truly feels seen. There comes a point when silence becomes the language of distance, when words are spoken yet meaning feels absent, when presence turns into habit and the rhythm of connection begins to lose its pulse. It's in this quiet and almost invisible space that loyalty continues to fade without notice. Many men do not intend for this to happen. They are often unaware of the slow transformation taking place within them, the kind that happens so gradually that by the time they feel it, it has already changed everything. In relationships, most men are taught to value stability over reflection. They are taught that love is something to maintain, not something to question. But the truth is, love that isn't examined begins to fall asleep. Loyalty that isn't nurtured begins to hollow from within. When a man stops reflecting on what his love means, when he stops feeling the pulse of his own emotions, his presence begins to feel like a shadow, still there but missing its warmth. There's a quiet form of betrayal that happens when a man remains physically loyal, but emotionally disappears. It's subtle because he still performs the gestures of affection, the daily routines, the shared responsibilities, the polite conversations. But beneath these familiar gestures, something vital has changed. The moments that once held emotion now feel like obligation. The laughter that once came naturally now sounds rehearsed. What was once a connection begins to resemble coexistence. Psychologically, this is often rooted in a kind of emotional exhaustion that men rarely speak of. When a person spends too long being who they think they're supposed to be, rather than who they are, a part of them starts to go numb. The man who was once expressive begins to withdraw, not because he doesn't care, but because caring feels complicated, because expressing emotions feels unsafe. He begins to live behind a quiet wall that even he doesn't realize he's built. That wall doesn't appear overnight. It's built through small choices, the avoidance of difficult conversations, the decision to stay silent rather than risk misunderstanding, the comfort of pretending that everything is fine. In philosophy, there is a concept called bad faith, introduced by Jean-Paul Sartre. It means to live in self-deception, to act as though one is free while denying that freedom through avoidance. Many men live in this quiet form of bad faith. Within their relationships, they avoid confronting the emotional dissonance between what they feel and what they show. They stay, they provide, they reassure, but inwardly they feel detached, uncertain, even resentful. It's not betrayal through deceit, but through self-denial. When emotional truth is denied, it eventually seeks another outlet. Sometimes it comes out through distraction, hobbies, work, screens, conversations that never go too deep. Sometimes it manifests irritability or distance, as though the man is trying to escape something he can't name. And sometimes it manifests through subtle betrayals, not of fidelity, but of attention, of care, of authenticity. The relationship still exists, but it loses its sense of aliveness. To the partner watching this change, it can feel confusing. There are no clear signs of betrayal, no fights, no broken promises, just a gradual dullness. She feels herself drifting from him, even when he's sitting right beside her. She senses the gap, but doesn't know how to bridge it. When she reaches out, he might smile, he might reassure her, but the energy that once met her halfway no longer does. She feels unseen, and he feels misunderstood. Each tries harder in their own way, but the harder they try without real communication, the wider the silence becomes. What makes this invisible betrayal so profound is that it hides beneath care. The man still wants to do what's right. He still wants to protect, to provide, to maintain peace. But in protecting peace, he avoids truth. In avoiding truth, he slowly betrays the very bond he wants to preserve. The philosopher Martin Buber described two ways of relating: I and I thou. In the I-thou relationship, we see the other person as a full being, alive and sacred. But in the I and mode, we begin to treat them as part of our environment, as something familiar, predictable. Many men unconsciously shift from I-thou to I and in long-term relationships, not out of malice, but out of familiarity. What was once seen with wonder becomes assumed. What was once a discovery becomes a routine, and routine without presence becomes emptiness. There's also a layer of quiet grief in this, the grief of losing what once felt alive. Men often feel this grief, but do not know how to name it. It shows up as restlessness, boredom, or even guilt. They might think, something's wrong with me, or maybe I'm not good enough. But in reality, what's wrong is that they've stopped being emotionally honest, both with themselves and with their partner. They continue to act as though everything is fine, but the soul can't thrive in pretense. In everyday moments, you can sense this kind of emotional distance. A man scrolling through his phone while his partner speaks. A quiet dinner where both smile politely but feel miles apart. The laughter that ends too quickly. The way he listens with his ears but not his eyes. These are the small betrayals that happen when presence is replaced by routine. They are not visible like lies, but they wound just as deeply, because love is not lost in one moment. It dissolves through 1,000 small inattentions. Psychologically, this kind of loyalty drift can also stem from the fear of vulnerability. To admit disconnection feels like failure. To express emptiness feels like weakness. So instead of confronting it, many men hide it under the surface. They convince themselves that it's just a phase, that it will fix itself with time. But time, without effort, doesn't heal emotional absence. It only deepens it. And yet, beneath all this, there remains a desire, a longing to reconnect, even if unspoken. Most men who drift emotionally are not indifferent. They are lost between the self they want to be and the self they've become, lost between wanting closeness and fearing what that closeness might demand. The betrayal, then, is not just toward their partner, it's toward their own humanity, because in denying the need to be seen, they deny one of the most natural parts of being alive, the need to be understood. This hidden betrayal, the kind that unfolds in silence, is a mirror for all of us. It reminds us that loyalty is not a promise kept once. It is a rhythm we must continue to nurture. It asks for presence, even when it's inconvenient. It asks for curiosity, even when comfort feels easier. It asks for honesty, even when the truth feels fragile. Because love that is not nourished by awareness quietly turns into habit, and habit, though stable, is never enough to keep two hearts truly connected. There comes a moment, often quiet and unnoticed, when a man looks at the person beside him and realizes that the bond they share has changed form, not broken, not vanished, just shifted into something gentler, less vibrant, more habitual. He may not know how to name this feeling, because it doesn't come with conflict or confrontation. It arrives like dusk, slowly dimming what was once filled with color. This is how most betrayals of loyalty unfold, not in acts of rebellion, but in the fading of attention, the loss of presence, the quiet surrender to emotional fatigue. In philosophy, there is an idea that love must be continually renewed to stay alive. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." The same is true for love. No two moments in love are ever identical, because both people are constantly changing. But when a man stops seeing love as something living and starts treating it as something permanent, he unconsciously begins to betray it. The relationship becomes a familiar landscape he no longer explores. He assumes he knows every detail, every response, every mood, and in that assumption, mystery, the heart of love, quietly dies. Psychologically, this moment often happens when men grow comfortable in predictability. Routine offers safety, but it also numbs the mind. It replaces curiosity with certainty. Over time, emotional patterns form, not out of choice, but out of habit. He learns how to respond to her tone, how to avoid certain topics, how to maintain peace. But peace built on avoidance is not peace. It's silence disguised as stability. He stops asking deeper questions, stops wondering what she's feeling, stops sharing what's within himself, and this unspoken distance becomes the quietest betrayal of all. The betrayal of not showing up fully anymore. When men withdraw emotionally, it's rarely because they want to hurt. More often, it's because they've lost their own internal language. Many grow up learning that strength means containment, that emotions are distractions, that vulnerability is weakness. So when confusion or dissatisfaction arise, they internalize it. They build a private world of quiet reasoning. I shouldn't complain. It's just a phase. She'll never understand. And in that internal dialogue, the connection begins to starve, because love cannot survive in thoughts alone. It needs expression. The heart does not respond to logic. It responds to presence. A man may still bring flowers, share laughter, even plan a future. But if his emotional body is absent, these gestures become performances, not out of deceit, but out of fear. fear of being misunderstood, of being seen as ungrateful, of disrupting the calm. So he wears a mask, one of reliability, strength, and composure, and the mask becomes so familiar that even he forgets what lies beneath. This too is a form of betrayal, not because it's cruel, but because it hides the truth, and when truth is hidden, intimacy loses its foundation. There's a beautiful but painful truth in human connection. The heart remembers even what the mind tries to forget. A partner can feel when love has become routine. She can sense when attention no longer lingers, when laughter feels rehearsed, when words sound softer but mean less. Her intuition reads what his logic denies, and slowly she too begins to retreat, not in anger, but in resignation. This mutual retreat creates an invisible dance of distance, each waiting for the other to break the silence, each missing the tenderness that once flowed so freely. In these moments, philosophy reminds us that betrayal is not always a matter of infidelity. Sometimes it is simply the failure to remain awake. Awareness is the core of fidelity, the willingness to keep seeing the person beside you with new eyes, to keep noticing what time tries to make invisible. When awareness fades, even loyalty becomes hollow. You can be loyal in action, but unfaithful in spirit. You can stay while your soul has already left. Psychologically, awakening from this quiet detachment requires gentleness. A man cannot return to presence through guilt or pressure. He must return through understanding. He must first see the layers of conditioning that made him numb. He must understand that his emotional silence wasn't rejection. It was protection, that he withdrew, not because he stopped caring, but because he didn't know how to carry the weight of feeling. Healing begins when he stops pretending to be unaffected, when he admits, even silently, "I don't know how to be close anymore, but I want to learn." That single acknowledgement is often where truth returns. In daily life, small acts of presence become the medicine. Listening without distraction, asking without assuming, touching without expectation. These gestures rebuild what silence eroded. They remind both hearts that connection is not found in grand declarations, but in the ordinary moments of noticing the tone in her voice, the weariness in her eyes, the quiet joy in her laughter. These moments reawaken the forgotten rhythm of loyalty, not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that keeps showing up with honesty. Sometimes, when men realize the quiet betrayals they've committed, they feel a deep sorrow. It's not guilt alone. It's the grief of waking up too late to what has been lost. They look back at the moments they missed, the tenderness they ignored, the words they left unsaid. But this grief, too, can be sacred if faced with humility, because in philosophy and in life, sorrow has always been the beginning of wisdom. Only when we face our own absence do we begin to understand presence. And yet, not all is lost. Even in relationships where the emotional bond feels dim, there remains a spark, a chance for renewal through honesty. If both souls are willing to sit in truth, without blame, and simply say, "We've drifted, but I still care," the energy begins to shift. It's not about returning to how things once were. It's about seeing one another again, as if for the first time. Love often needs rediscovery, more than repair. The ancient Stoics believed that every obstacle is also an opportunity for inner growth. A man who realizes his quiet betrayals has a chance to rebuild himself, not just for his partner, but for his own soul. He learns to feel again, to express without shame, to stay open even when life feels uncertain. Through awareness, He reclaims the kind of loyalty that doesn't come from fear or duty, but from understanding the loyalty of being fully present. In the end, overcoming life's hardships, especially those born from silence, begins with gentleness. We cannot fight numbness. We must listen to it. We cannot demand connection. We must nurture it. We cannot restore love through control. We can only revive it through honesty. Every human heart longs to be seen, not as perfect, but as real. And when we learn to see again, to listen again, to feel again, even the deepest betrayals soften into lessons of awareness. Because the truth is, most men don't betray loyalty out of malice. They do so because they forget to stay awake in love. They forget that love is not something we possess, but something we continually create. And when a man learns to live with awareness, to hold space for silence, to speak truth gently, to meet another's eyes with presence, betrayal no longer has a place to hide. What remains then is not perfection, but peace, a quiet peace that comes from finally being honest, both with others and with oneself.